Hey, Penn State football fans, Johnny McGonigal is with me, Bob Flounders. It's a lovely Tuesday, big day in soccer. As we tape this, it's U.S. versus Iran in a couple of hours. It's all Big Ten week. Penn State finished the season 10-2, whooped up on Michigan State pretty good. We await their bowl fate, Johnny, because it's also championship week, and it's going to be dependent on how that plays out. But we had some big news already this week, some good news. If you're a Penn State fan, a prominent Penn State player who is draft eligible has come out and told, I believe, ESPN that he will return for another year. I think it's a great sign for Penn State's offense, Johnny, in 2023.
Yeah, Bob, Olu Fashanu, that report came out from ESPN, and then a couple minutes later, he released a statement himself on Twitter announcing that he is going to be skipping the 2023 NFL draft in April and deciding to come back for another season at Penn State. It's huge news. He's a guy who, as a first-year starter, only 19 years old, in 8 games, across the NFL draft community, established himself as arguably the top offensive line prospect in the NFL draft. They're looking at his potential, his quickness, his athleticism, his intelligence. Everything about Olu Fashanu screamed, top 10 pick, as long as he went through the pre-draft process on without a hitch and all that. And now Penn State gets a guy like that back, which is just, we're going to talk about it now. It's really massive for, their 2023 hopes for everyone around them and that offensive line specifically.
Yeah, and we had talked during his breakout year. He hasn't played. I think he's been dealing with a medical issue since the late stages of the Ohio State game, so he hasn't really played down the stretch for Penn State. But we saw him out on the field walking around with his teammates during that heated land-grant trophy battle last Saturday. He's coming back, and he was definitely maybe one of the biggest surprises of the Big Ten season, and in really his first year as starter. He started the Outback Bowl, or what used to be the Outback Bowl, in Penn State's loss to Arkansas when Rasheed Walker was hurt, and then he moved in as the permanent starter on the left side in 2022. Hit the ground running, really good, especially in pass protection. But there weren't too many defensive ends that had any kind of success against Olu, whether it was Auburn's defense, whether it was Michigan or Ohio, during the Ohio State game before he got hurt. Just a very solid player, athletic. James Franklin talked all season about his play strength, his ability to recover when he's initially beaten. It's rare for a young left tackle to be like that. I kind of really thought he might go, honestly, just because of what some people were saying about him. Johnny, I know that James Franklin had talked about, he had a meeting with his parents and Olu late in the season before he made his decision, called it very productive. I wonder if maybe James knew all along that this was going to be the decision, but it is great news. And we can talk a little bit, I think, about what this offensive line could potentially look like now with him back.
Yeah, and look, just going to his decision, it was a difficult one. I'm sure it's not one he took lightly, and it's not like it was just one conversation with James Franklin and Phil Trautwein and Olu and his family. This is something that's been talked about, for a while now over the last few weeks. And James Franklin a few weeks ago said that Olu's phone has been blowing up. Agents reaching out, trying to get him, not only signed but to declare and to go. And it's difficult for a kid like that when you're hearing first round grades and top 10 pick grades from respected NFL, draft analysts and that kind of stuff. It's hard to say no to that. I mean, you look at last year, Ike Ekwonu, the top taken tackle, the kid out of NC State, 6 overall to the Panthers, signed a contract 4 years, $27 million. It is hard to turn down that kind of money and that kind of potential, but Olu is a guy who really values his education. That was something that was that's just been persistent throughout this process, is that him getting his degree, which I believe is in line to do in the fall. That means a lot. James Franklin called him a potential academic All-American, so he's a guy who's got his good head on his shoulders. It is really hard to turn down that kind of money, and we've talked about that before. But this is just really big for Penn State's offense as a whole. This is a guy who across the board, you look at, just in terms of draft analysts and guys, they just love his tape. I talked to Dane Brugler earlier in the month about Olu, and he just raved about him. I mean, Olu kind of came out of nowhere. He wasn't on anyone's like preseason top 50 lists or anything like that. But, Dane Brugler of The Athletic had him at number 5 overall in his midseason rankings, the top offensive lineman. And, it's you don't see, guys, ranked that highly, making that kind of decision to come back for an extra year. So a surprise to be sure, but a welcome one.
Yeah. And if there was anything good, Johnny, that came out of Olu missing a significant amount of time, as we said, we last saw him in the Ohio State game. Penn State went on a nice little run without him in November, going 4-0. But, with him out, Penn State had a decision to make on another talented young, offensive lineman, Drew Shelton, who essentially replaced Olu in the lineup at left tackle, a true freshman left tackle, which is even rarer than Olu himself. And so now Penn State, I don't want to say they have an embarrassment of riches along the offensive line. That's a phrase I've never uttered during James Franklin's time in State College, because it's always been the area that's caused the biggest concern, and James would admit that. But if you look potentially at what might be coming back, not only at tackle, but also inside at the guard spots, Hunter Norzad, the Cornell transfer, has already announced he's going to come back. He's a guy that got a lot of starting experience down the stretch when another young player, Landon Tengwall, had season-ending injury in the pregame warmups to the Michigan game. Johnny, I say this offensive line could be a strength of the team in 2023.
I think with Olu coming back, it will be. The only thing is there's a couple of loose ends still right now where Drew Scruggs, the center, and Bryce Effner, who's been starting at right tackle really for the last month or so, with Caden Wallace hasn't played in a while, and we don't know his status, whether he's been warming up and just not playing in recent weeks. But Bryce Effner and Drew Scruggs both walked during senior day this past weekend ahead of the Michigan State game. And, we've seen guys walk and just come back. They have eligibility. Both those guys can play in 2023. Those are just decisions they'll have to make, whether they want to, wrap up their college career, move on to the next, or come back. And with Olu coming back, you would think that would maybe be a little bit even more of an incentive for those two to really bring this offensive line to maybe be one of the best in the Big Ten, one of the best in the country, with Olu coming back. So I think that it would be a big boost for Penn State if they're able to get Juice and Bryce back, as well as you mentioned Hunter Norzad, you mentioned Landon Tengwall, Sal Wormley as well at right guard with plenty of eligibility remaining. So this is an offensive line that, coming into this year was a question mark.
Right.
And after Olu's injury, after Landon's injury, the way that they've been able to continue to, churn out results and play, and Drew Shelton's development is huge in that. I think you're going to have a deep room next year and a lot of talent.
Yeah. And Penn State fans, just be on the lookout, right? This December month is in the age of the transfer portal, in the age of opting out of bowl games, all that stuff to get ready for the draft. Penn State fans, keep your eyes and ears peeled, because there's going to be some announcements, probably good and bad, regarding Penn State. I don't know that they're going to be lucky enough to keep the entire team, in State College for another year. I'm sure there's some other talented players weighing decisions, but this offensive line, all the players you mentioned, including Sal Wormley, they also have a very talented 2023, recruiting class, which with a lot of promising offensive linemen in that group. And you add in some other players, I think that they wanted to redshirt this year. They hoped they could redshirt them, but they also knew that if they had to play them, I think they were really confident that they would have gotten the job done. Like a guy I always get this guy's name, Vega Ione, I think is his name, power player inside. I think they were able so far I know he played against Michigan State, but I think they were able to protect his red shirt. But they really, really have their ducks in a row now on that offensive line. You talk about the freshman running backs they have we expect back at Penn State, next year. And this offense really, really has the look of something special. They're going to have a new starting quarterback. I know the Penn State fan base is excited about that. Another young player, right? So this offense really trending in the right direction. And I think it really, I think that Olu's announcement really, what a pleasant surprise. And this should have, Johnny, this should have the fan base awfully excited about 2023.
Yeah, the 2023 hype train is leaving the station, Bob. I mean, it's get on now, because you mentioned the young guys that they have up front. You mentioned Vegayon, but also JB Nelson has gotten some good reps in there from Lackawanna coming in. You mentioned the 2023 potential signees, guys who are verbally committed right now, Alex Birchmeyer and Javen Williams being really the headliners of the class, both being offensive linemen. And then, of course, Nick Singleton and Katron Allen, two true freshmen who have just been, I mean, they're forming one of the best running back duos in the country, let alone just true freshmen, making Big Ten history this year, both rushing for over 700 yards. First time that has happened, that the Big Ten has had a true freshman duo do that. And so they're, making history this year, and it's not even with, an offense that you could see it being more explosive next year with Drew Aller at quarterback. And we don't know what Parker Washington's going to do. That's something to keep an eye on. We don't know what other departures there might be on this roster, but specifically on the offense.
Yeah.
Even if Washington leaves, the wide receiver room is really deep in a sense that there's just a lot of guys and a lot of mouths to feed. And, the tight end room is the same. And so you mentioned the portal. The transfer portal officially opens December 5th. But you're going to see guys, even in the buildup to that, we've already seen it across the country, not specifically at Penn State, but guys will be announcing that, hey, I'm entering the portal, so that when the portal opens on December 5th, that they're ready, coaches are ready to recruit them and all that kind of good stuff. So, I'm expecting plenty of announcements, whether it's guys leaving for the draft, coming back, but also leaving the program and coming into the program, because there's some guys out there too in the portal that Penn State's going to be after.
Absolutely. So we have some time to do this. I mentioned the all Big Ten teams are coming out, but let's deal with, I think, what Penn State fans really want to talk about. Let's talk about some potential Penn State players who are draft eligible that legitimately have decisions to make, because we believe not only could they be drafted, but they could get drafted, fairly high, and kind of where we think maybe they sit. If we stay on the offensive side, two names maybe we could talk about. You mentioned Parker Washington already, just completed his third season at Penn State, had a huge game against Ohio State, productive player all 3 years at Penn State. Classic build for a slot receiver in the NFL, runs great routes. He was open a lot this year. He didn't always get the ball. I think Penn State fans know what I'm talking about. He knows how to get open. He's really strong after the catch. He's a guy I think, we're going to kind of be wary of maybe what he might do. And another guy I wanted to talk about is Brenton Strange, the tight end. I believe he just completed, going into the bowl game. I think this was his fourth year at Penn State. If Olu Fashanu was maybe the biggest surprise on the Penn State offense this year, I think you can make a pretty strong case that Brenton Strange all-around development was really maybe a close second as far as, because we had a feeling those young runners were going to be pretty good, and they probably exceeded expectations. But they were clearly two talented players, and they were getting a lot of praise in the offseason. Brenton Strange, though, not just as a receiver but as a blocker, I think he really developed into one of the better tight ends in the country, and I'm just curious to see what maybe he's going to do.
Yeah, you mentioned him as a blocker, and I think that's what stood out to me most this season is we kind of knew that Brenton Strange had the athleticism and the security blanket kind of vibe to him, given his longstanding relationship in the program and with Sean Clifford specifically. We saw what he could do after the catch in the first game against Purdue, and we knew that he was going to be a big part of this offense really after that. But his development as a blocker, and we really saw it at Auburn and from then on take off, him opening up the right side for Nick Singleton down on the Plains. And he just continued to improve in that area. And, sometimes with these guys who have been around programs for 4 or 5 years, sometimes you're just kind of ready. And I think he's going to have an NFL future. Where he gets drafted or where he ends up, that's totally up to, the next few months and all that kind of stuff, the draft prep and combine, all that kind of stuff, factors in so heavily to that. But I do agree that he has developed into one of the more well-rounded tight ends, at the very least in the Big Ten, and if not the country. And with regards to Parker Washington, I really think his injury just plays such a big factor in all of this. And we don't know the specific, James Franklin doesn't give us the specifics of all this, but just again looking at the timeline a bit, Parker didn't travel to Rutgers. After that game, James Franklin announced that, hey, he's out for the season. So he missed the Michigan State game. He won't be available for the bowl game, really from, so he got injured somewhere in between that Maryland, because he played against Maryland and the Rutgers game. You take it from that point, to the bowl game, which is going to be late December, early January. I mean, that's at least a 6-week injury. And at that point, if you're talking about something more severe, these guys go right in after the bowl game, start preparing for the combine, which is in February. And so if he misses that time, I mean, that is huge when it comes to draft prep. So if he comes back based off of that, potentially, again, we don't know the severity of it necessarily, but if that timeline is even further along and he decides to come back, I mean, that's a huge boost for Penn State's offense to have their leading receiver and a guy who, behind Jahan Dotson last season, still racked up 800 yards and this year was obviously so good against Ohio State and flashed against Minnesota. To have that kind of security blanket, not only in the running game, but also in the passing game, your top receiver for Drew Aller, I think that'd be huge.
Yeah, and there is a chance that Penn State could. I mean, I think there is a chance. I don't know how good of a chance there is, but there's a chance that Penn State's literally their entire offense could, with the exception of Sean Clifford, could be back. You mentioned the offensive line guys who have decisions to make, but do also have eligibility left. They have the young running backs. They have 3 pretty darn good tight ends that, if they return, holy mackerel. The offensive line, Parker Washington at receiver. Keandre Lambert-Smith had a very nice game to close out the regular season against Michigan State. They feel really good about Trey Wallace. Mitchell Tinsley was a transfer portal addition that really helped, especially early and then in the middle of the season. But he has played a lot of football. With or without him, that's a gifted room with Parker Washington. If he decided to come back, this could be a really dangerous offense, even with he's not untested, but he just lacks starting experience. Drew Aller at quarterback, but man, he is certainly a physically gifted quarterback, more talented physically, I think, clearly than Sean. James Franklin talked about Sean's intangibles and getting the protection set and changing things at the line of scrimmage, and really his intelligence as his superpower. But I'll tell you, Drew Aller's superpower is his physical gifts right now, and they are impressive. But this it's not just the offensive line. This whole offense, you think about that thing coming back, and boy, they would become not only a force in the Big Ten, but a force nationally.
Yeah, the only guy that we know for sure has gone outside of Sean Clifford is Mitchell Tinsley, the transfer from Western Kentucky. He's out of eligibility, second leading receiver on this team, and he's been so clutch on third downs this year. Really sneaky player, a very nice contributor, and I think he's done a nice job after transferring over. But you lose those 2 guys, even if you lose both Parker and Mitchell Tinsley, there's a lot of talent in that wide receiver room. We mentioned before the freshmen. It's kind of a bit of a logjam. Well, that's a good problem to have. If you're Taylor Stubblefield and you're James Franklin and Mike Yarsich, is to have an abundance of options. Amari Evans has played in, I think, all but 1 game this season as a true freshman, and so he's seen a lot of snaps, he's seen a lot of ball. Even guys like Caden Saunders, who's incredibly talented, Anthony Ivey, Christian Driver making the switch, but he's been playing back and forth between defense and offense this season. Son of Donald Driver is going to be sticking at receiver, at least for now. And Tyler Johnson in there as well. And you're going to add a guy or 2 in the 23 class. They had Rodney Gallagher, the 2023 West Virginia commit, on campus this past weekend. And, everything's kind of going to crap in Morgantown right now, which could be Penn State's gain of Gallagher, who's a super, talented and fast kid from the Pittsburgh area. If he ends up flipping. That'd be big to add him to the class with Carmelo Taylor as well. So a lot of moving parts, but a lot of good parts, like a lot of parts to work with for 2023 and 24 if you're really looking way ahead. But this offense has the makings of a really good one in 23, and so does the defense too.
Yeah, and as I said, we only get a chance really to chat once a week on the Blue White Breakdown. So we have a couple minutes here yet. Let's talk real quick about a couple of defensive players, and also I want to circle back to 2 offensive players just to get our thoughts kind of locked in, because like you said, things tend to go fast and furious. Decisions get made in a hurry. You never know when they're coming. So Johnny, on the defensive side, a couple of names I wanted to throw out for you. Adisa Isaac at defensive end. You look at his numbers at the end of the year; they're pretty good. But for me, he had a couple of really big games, and then he had a couple of games that are like barely showed up on the stat sheet. Very talented player, missed 2021, I think, with an Achilles injury. So it probably took him, some time to really feel comfortable. But he certainly flashed legit skills as an edge rusher, especially in the Auburn game early. He was productive, I think, in the last 4 games of this season. He's a guy we could talk about. Joey Porter Jr. came back and played against Michigan State, I thought, which is a very interesting sign. He could have easily, getting all the praise he's getting, he could easily just shut it down if he was really thinking about, the NFL. He's a player that I'm, kind of very interested in. 3 more names for you. Curtis Jacobs, the outside linebacker. Also, even though they didn't play a lot, Caden Wallace and Kevon Lee really disappeared from the Penn State team. James made it, and James, suggested that they both have been dealing with injury issues. Of those 5 players, where did you want to start?
Yeah, let's start with Joey Porter because I think it's the most obvious thing. I think he's probably off to the NFL. He should be, and this is a guy who's been, we talk about Olu and how young he is. He's 19. Joey Porter's been around the program now for a bit longer, right? He's a fourth-year guy and has played a lot of football, whereas Olu is just in his first year starting. Mm-hmm. Joey Porter seems like a kind of kid who, if he can play, he's going to play. And so that's why, coming back from that appendicitis, which was, I was a little surprised he played in the Michigan State game. But then at the same time, him and his drive to just be on the field and you understand it. I think he's going to the NFL. I think he's super talented. He's been thrown away from all season long since the Purdue game. He was targeted 14 times against Purdue. The next 7 games, he was targeted 14 total times. Teams got wise. They were like, all right, we're not going to throw at number 9. And I think NFL teams see that, and I think it's a pretty obvious choice for him. Obviously, Penn State would love to have him back, but I think he's gone. In terms of Adisa Isaac, that's one where I feel like he could come back and improve. And same with Curtis Jacobs too. Both those guys I feel like could come back and improve and get more consistent, especially in Adisa's case. Again, coming back from that injury earlier in the season, it took him some time to get into the swing of things. 3 tackles for loss against Auburn, which was really nice, and you like to see that. Mm-hmm. But then from that point on, he's had 4 tackles for loss the last 4 weeks.
Yep.
But I think 1 combined, 2 half tackles for loss against Central Michigan, Northwestern Michigan, Minnesota, and Ohio State. And if you're NFL scouts, you want to see him do it against Ohio State and against Michigan, and he really didn't. So I think you'd like to see more consistency out of him, as well as Curtis Jacobs too. And just as from a Penn State fan perspective, if you're looking at that defense, you just want to see Curtis Jacobs and Abdul Carter working together for another season at linebacker after seeing the way that Abdul grew in that position as well. So if they can get those 2 guys back, which I think would be in their best interest to come back, I think that would be a huge boon for Manny Diaz as long as he's around and Penn State's defense.
Yeah, and just my sense though, watching Kevon Lee and Caden Wallace, the second half of the regular season, they were in uniform a lot. They didn't play. I don't know what the deal is, Johnny. I just got a sense though that I think Kevon Lee was a 3rd-year player who obviously sees the writing on the wall, right? Like it's going to be real tough to get playing time at Penn State when you have uber talents like Nick Singleton and Katron Allen. So, and even Caden Wallace, with Bryce Effner playing well, with Drew Shelton showing that he could handle the big stage, and with Olu coming back, I don't know for sure, but they sure seem like transfer portal candidates to me, and maybe that had something to do with maybe why they disappeared a little bit, especially late in the season. If they were gonna try the portal, they certainly don't want to get hurt at Penn State and then not be able to play next year. Kevon Lee can clearly play somewhere. It's just tough for him to play at Penn State. I'm not so sure about Caden Wallace because even before he disappeared, he was not playing well. And this was a guy that I thought in 2020 and early in 2021 could be a really good player. So I'm not sure what he is thinking, but I think Kevon Lee, if you're Kevon Lee, you want to go someplace where you could play a more prominent role, I think, in the running game. I think those two have some decisions to make. They may have already made them, but there were times when they were good players at Penn State. But I just think if you look at the depth chart and how Penn State's recruited and developed, there might not be any room at the end for those two.
Yeah, I agree with you on both those. With Kevon, just a quick note, because I guess it was a couple weeks ago he tweeted saying, he's going to be back from his injury with a hashtag We Are. I know people read into stuff like that all the time, and so you just have to mention that. But if he ended up leaving, wouldn't blame him at all and would totally understand it, because that's a situation where, like you said, he's not going to be getting snaps over Nick Singleton and Kayvon Allen. That's just the reality. That's how it is. And another guy too to mention is Christian Veilleux, because very obvious that he's not going to be getting snaps over Drew Aller. Yep. Drew Aller came in, somewhat surprisingly, took the backup job from week one. Mm-hmm. Whenever we've seen him, again, he's looked like a freshman sometimes, but then sometimes it's like, yeah, that's a 5-star kid. Like that's the future of your program. You think about the touchdown to the back of the end zone to Trey Wallace at Indiana, like moments like that, you're like, okay, that kid is going to be the starter next year, unequivocally. Yeah. And so Veilleux, if you want to play, if he's fine being the backup at Penn State and being one injury away from starting for the Nittany Lions, fair enough. That's totally fine. But if you want to play right away or have really have a chance to compete for a starting job this spring, I mean, it's transfer portal time, right? And that's a scenario where I'm sure James Franklin knows it's coming. I'm sure everyone in the program would understand and know it's coming because you also have Bo Perbula in the room, who came in with Aller. And I actually think he's in a fine spot. I've been asked about him transferring, and I actually think Bo Perbula, who redshirted this year while Aller's been playing. So Aller, if he lives up to his potential and everything, would be gone in maybe 2 or 3 years. But Bo Perbula is a guy who can be around for 4 more years and potentially start going into 2025. Again, we're looking way down the line. But Veilleux is a guy that I would not be surprised in the coming days if he announced a transfer.
Yeah, and what we're really trying to say, Johnny, is even though the regular season's over, December is a crazy month if you're a Penn State football fan, a player, a coach. There's going to be movement. You don't know when it's going to happen, but rarely do things stay the same. And sometimes there's going to be surprises. They'll be pleasant. They could also be, disappointments if players move on or they enter the transfer portal. You just never know what's going to happen. Players are free to kind of, set their own market. And if they see time or they see an opportunity somewhere else, I think you got to wish them the best. But I think the month of December, especially if you're a Penn State fan, you want to stay close to your computer and PennLive, because between myself and Johnny, there's going to be a lot to talk about the next couple of weeks. It's player movement. It could be coaching movement. There's awards that need to be won. Penn State's going to figure prominently in some of those. There is a gigantic championship weekend looming, which will impact Penn State and where they're going to play their bowl game. They finished 10-2. Johnny, they secured the land-grant trophy. They go 4-0 in November. The teams that beat them were really, really good teams. I mean, clearly Michigan was just better than Penn State, and that's proven out to be nothing fluky about that. They put it to Ohio State in Columbus. Ohio State found a way to beat Penn State late on the road. Kudos to them. But Penn State, the rest of the way, they beat some good teams. To win at Auburn is not easy. They made it look easy. To rally to win at Purdue, who is now in the Big Ten title game, another, I think, feather in Penn State's cap. And they beat the teams they were supposed to beat. And you look across the landscape, and that doesn't always happen. There's always upsets. Penn State took care of business, very deserving to be 10-2, and hopefully they'll get a just reward. Penn State fans, stay close to PennLive this week and beyond, because we're going to have a ton of news hopefully most of it's good. Johnny, anything else you're watching out for in the short term as we turn the page to December?
I think the big thing is just the bowl destination, because there's so many moving parts with that. I'm in the process of writing something up ahead of the CFP rankings that come out Tuesday night, and those will have a big impact on where Penn State goes, and obviously this weekend as well. It feels like Penn State is locked into a New Year's Six bowl. There's a couple of wild scenarios in which they might not make that, and I'll outline those in that piece on PennLive.com. Little plug. Never hurts, Bob. So, but I think Penn State should be locked into a New Year's Six bowl, and we'll see where they end up.